Hi and welcome to Prime Lenses. My name is Ian. Each episode I interview a photographer about 3 lenses that have meant a lot to them. Maybe they're attached permanently to a camera, maybe they used to use them and let them get away, or maybe these are the lenses that they can never ever part with and they've had them for years. But whatever it is, it's really just an excuse to have a good chat about what brought them to photography in the first place and what keeps them so enamoured with this endlessly fascinating pursuit that we all enjoy. My guest today is Danny Bligh. Danny and I have known each other since 2017, meeting on Instagram over a kind of shared search for a minimal, super high quality setup. It's probably around that time that he switched to the Leica Q, and I was considering the same. And over the years, he's tried everything. He's shot with everything from Sony and Canon, Nikon, all the way round, and has landed on a Leica setup today. So everything he shoots is Leica, from the original Q through the original SL through to his SL2S, I think, that he uses for work. He's a really interesting photographer. I really like his work. He's got a really healthy balance between professional and personal, and he was great company, and I hope you enjoy this conversation too. So here is Danny Bligh. Yeah, so, and thank you for being the first person as well on Prime Lenses. Like, I'm absurdly excited to get to talk to people, and it's funny because we've been friends for ages, really.
Yeah.
Since like 2017.
Yep.
I think we started talking about stuff when you were the Leica Q was the center of your world,
and it still is, believe it or not.
Yeah,
I've been around the entire world of Leica, and the one constant in my entire journey is the original Leica Q. It's still what I use pretty much all day. It's always in my bag. I've tried everything else. I mean, most people that know me know I've tried 10 of everything, and a constant for me is the original Leica Q. It still is to this day. So
what do you think that is? What do you think that is about it?
It's honestly a few things. Older digital sensors just speak to me, I think, in creative ways that I'm all for the latest and greatest for work, for clients. I like the dynamic range and the insane low light performance. But for my personal work, I like the kind of the imperfections of older digital sensors. I like, it's going to sound crazy, but for my personal work, I enjoy blown out highlights and lost shadows, and and these older sensors that just couldn't keep up that well, because I started on a 1.2 megapixel Fuji digital camera that was, I mean, absolutely terrible. But I learned photography through these, pretty, certainly by today's standards, pretty nightmarish cameras. And part of that, I think, just stuck with me. Kind of my style was kind of developed with, pretty bad digital cameras. And the Q was kind of my first, like, oh my gosh, I could carry this and do everything that I want to say I can do with this camera and this lens. And having said that, like, it's 28 millimeter lens, but it's not 28 millimeters. It's wider than that. I've tested. It's closer to 25 millimeters.
Yeah.
I pretty much always use my Q with a 35 millimeter crop, but I treat it as my 35 millimeter lens now. So yeah, I got my start on bad digital cameras and worked my way up to the Leica Q, and man, the old sensor, the limitations, I've kind of developed a little bit of a style around some of those limitations, and I'm really happy with it.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. I'm really glad it's back in your bag. Like, as much as I love that you went the reporter route, and I love how much you've used that over the years. But there is something like all's right in the world when Danny's got a Q in his hand somehow.
That's
like
awesome.
when your photo from the coffee shop is your laptop, your Q to one side, and a coffee, and like I say to you all the time, I'm not jealous of that close focus. It's fine. It's fine. I can live without that. I don't need it.
Well, you've started your journey down the rabbit hole, unfortunately. I mean, it's inevitable. You'll end up with all sorts of, your journey is relatively new enough that you've got all sorts of time to dive into these different systems, you know, like I have.
For sure.
Yeah.
That lens, I mean, even so, the justification, of course, is that even, and as a segue onto the topic, but like the lens alone on that camera is worth the investment in the camera.
Man,
you know, it's so good.
You're absolutely right. It's so good. What I always tell friends is, you know, I always run around with the Q because for me, it pretty much does everything. It does everything I want it to. You know, my photography is kind of subject based. It's not very scene based. I kind of define it as kind of subject based. And for me to just be able to twist the Q into macro mode, you know, it can do anything, you know, and I leave my Q on pretty much auto. The only thing I adjust is aperture. But I mean, I taped the shutter speed on my Q to leave it on auto because I was always accidentally bumping it to 2,000th of a second. And so, I mean, I shoot that camera. I adjust aperture, but otherwise, like, man, I just take it out and click. It's so fast. It does everything for me. So it's back. It's back in full. It's back in my life.
No, it's wonderful. It's funny. We have a similar starting point, by the way, as well. My first digital camera was a Fuji. It was the 1.5. I think it was called the 1500 MX.
Oh, okay.
One of those tall. So it was with the XD cards, was it, that they used?
That
those
sounds
funny
familiar.
little thin cards. So that was, and as you say, they were terrible, but the promise was there. There was something about it.
Man, it's true. And they got better quickly. You know, it's kind of it's kind of like iPhone cameras. You know, it didn't take them a super long time to get usable. You know, digital cameras once it was kind of mainstream, you know, with the early Fuji digital, and you know, Canon was doing pretty good things pretty early, and Sony, you know, they got good fast, and that was you know, so that's benefited us greatly as you know, people running around using these. You know, like I tell people all the time people ask me, the number one question I get, they say, you know, I want a good camera. I want a good camera to get pictures of my kids, or I want, you know, I just want casual, but I want a good camera. And I say, how much do you want to spend? If they tell me under $1,000, I tell them you have that camera in your back pocket on your iPhone.
Exactly.
They've gotten that good. They really have. You know, so if you want to get into, you know, a Fuji X100, you know, that's a step up from an iPhone. But to me, I mean, much below that, you have that camera in your back. You know, we're running around with them, every one of us. You know, they've gotten great. So
I'm amazed. I've got the Meta Ray-Ban glasses, and I post a lot of those pictures, and it's unreasonably good. It's unreasonably good for a camera on your face. It's incredible. These ones are my Snap spectacles, and I've had these for years, and I love them. But it's like taking a photograph through a potato, which has an aesthetic, it has a look, and I quite enjoy it. But compared, I mean, the Meta ones, the quality, it's a 12 megapixel camera phone sensor from a few years ago, and the quality is astonishing. Like if you look at my Instagram stories from today, everything in the woods is taken.
I saw that, and I never would have guessed that, but I guess, you know, and that tech also, it's only going to get better. You know, those cameras are only going to get better. So there's probably part of it for me with my kind of undying dedication to the original Leica Q. I just can't let it go. Is I've got the work systems and the crazy, you know, dynamic range. I've got all that covered. The Q is just, I just don't want to think. I just want to capture, and I want to capture quickly. And that's the original Leica Q for me. But man, there was a time I didn't shoot anything except my M10P reporter. And that's been on the shelf for a little while. It'll come back out, but I go in pretty big phases with all the hobbies in my life. And right now I'm kind of full steam with the original Q, but the M will come back, you know, and I'll travel. I'll do a great trip with it, and it'll be all I ever want to use again. That's typically, you know,
that's probably a good jumping off point onto your first of your three lenses to talk about, because it sounds like your lenses you've chosen are mostly M glass by the sounds of it.
That is accurate. That is accurate.
So what's your first one that you want to kind of delve into?
Well, kind of, if there was going to be one lens that I would say I couldn't live without, one for everything would be the Leica made a 50 millimeter 1.4. It's a Summilux, but it's a pre-aspherical version.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't have the ultra clinical modern sharpness. It's a little bit older, and it shows in the images, but that's the one that it's, to me, and what I like, it's paired so perfectly to the Leica M10, in my case, the M10P, but it's the same sensor. It's paired so perfectly to those sensors for what I want to do that I feel like the images from it almost make themselves. I feel like I don't even have to think about what I'm attempting to create with it. I feel like if I have that combo and I point it in generally the correct direction, that's how, it's just a melding of sensor and glass to me. That lens has, it has never let me down. So that's the one that, if there was a one and done for me, it is the Leica 50 millimeter 1.4 pre-aspherical. And I've had all the aspherical Summiluxes, and they're amazing. But I don't know. I'm all about rendering and character, and that lens is my number one that I could never part with.
Yeah, it's funny when you really connect with something like that. And I think that was the kind of the catalyst for having these kinds of conversations, is to find out what.
That's great.
Because it's not just, as you say, there are smaller, there are lighter, there are, look at graphs, there are technically better ones.
Exactly. It's true.
But if this one speaks to you and says,
which it does. Yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah, they're sharper, there's better performance, but I've always found that's those elements of photography are some of the kind of last areas that sort of get my attention. As I've kind of told you a little bit of my story with the Leica Q, I've almost found myself leaning into imperfections in lenses and older sensors, and kind of leaning into the character, more of the limitations of creating in the boundaries of what those cameras can't do. And going, well, I know this older sensor is going to blow out these highlights, so I'm going to lean into that, and I'm going to make this scene be about these ruined highlights or these pitch black shadows, versus, well, I need more dynamic range to that's just not me. It's I like to find kind of, and I'm this way with everything, so that kind of speaks strongly to the 50 millimeter Summilux, is I like to find the strength of, okay, what is this amazing at? And then, the Q is the same way. What is this incredible at? And then I work within those boundaries. And that's, I feel like I produce pretty quickly when I'm producing that way of going, okay, I know this lens like the back of my hand. I know this sensor like the back of my hand. I know exactly what it wants to do and what it's not going to do well. I'm just going to lean into that and work within those boundaries. And it becomes total second nature.
Yes.
At that point. Yeah. Total second nature to know a lens. And, the value of practicing with this gear is like, it's kind of going to be a little bit of a tangent. I'll try not to go down, but the art of just practice is kind of dying. I feel like with, social media and things, it's kind of, well, if you can buy a camera and charge a family to take their picture, and you can, well, I'm a photographer now, but there's not really a lot of practice taking place. And, so what I'm still doing every day with a Q in my bag is I'm just practicing. I'm just learning this camera and learning this lens and what it's good at and what it's not so great at. And, and I've kind of found that sort of quickly with all the Leicas I've tried. And I've shot everything. I started on Nikon and Canon and Sony. I mean, I've used everything. And I kind of find with some of the newer systems that I use is sometimes they can be, it's going to sound funny, but they can be a little bit too good for what I like to do. You can kind of go, well, I kind of wanted to lose those shadows or those highlights, but the camera's kind of the sensor's kind of giving too much. It's kind of it's kind of too good. And that's my SL2S, I love that camera, but it's approaching that kind of too good for what
you get away with murder on a modern camera, don't you? Like,
you
recover
really
the highlights, recover the shadows, and then pass it through Lightroom to take out the noise, and it's
That's so true. And you could have done anything with any lens and any subject, any settings. Man, that's a good way of putting it. That's really accurate.
Yeah, I think also something I've noticed about you as a person, which I was interested and I wanted to talk to you about, was you share a lot of your home sort of environment, your studio space, and the light as it passes through and stuff like that. But one thing I've noticed, like, you love very well made tactile things. You've got vinyl everywhere, great books, like lots of wood, lots of natural things. Like, I feel like that tactility and sort of a machined, designed, kind of thought through, like that really matters to you in the tools that you use.
That's very accurate observation. And that started, I would say, creatively with Apple, with whenever the first ever iPod came out. I'm aging myself. I'm going to be 44 in October.
So whenever,
all right. So when the first iPod came out, it changed everything tech wise for me forever. You know, I was like never the same. I got a Mac, I got a digital camera, and that was all to the first iPad. So, or to the first iPod. So kind of from a tech perspective, that's absolutely the case. And then I've just gotten into, as a pretty long standing hobby now. Yeah. Just, I like used things. I don't like anything, you know, as you can tell, looking at my cameras, you know, a lot of people think I beat up my cameras purposely. I don't. I mean, you're hearing straight from me that I don't. That's not the case. But I like well-worn, you know, I don't like brand new, you know, I kind of always on a hunt for old records and old books, you know, exactly as you stated, is I just like, as you said, tactile, you know, like I'm in such a digital world, my existence. So my day job is photography and graphic design and just the digital arts in general. That's what I do all day. I sit in my Pro Display XDR, and my world is so digital. It's, you know, it's on a screen, it's resolution. And I think that's probably part of why I like my world outside of work to be exactly what you noticed about, you know, tactile and handmade and worn down, and, you know, my cameras and my guitars are always beat up, and man, I don't know. I just respond to that old beat up books, and it's very seldom that I connect with anything brand new. And if I get something brand new, I really try pretty hard to make it not brand new. You know, my M10P reporter is kind of a good example of that. You know, the amount of people that have asked me what I did to it, and I'm like, all I did was use it every day for 3 years. That's all I did. Yeah, I've dropped it on the cement 3 times, two of them. You know, I had to go to Leica for repair, but I mean, I guess I just don't like things when they feel too pristine. It's not really inspiring to me that much. That's a very accurate observation for sure.
Yeah, well, I think it speaks to, I think, one of the things that stands out about you as a creator. Like, it seems like you appreciate good design, you appreciate a well-made thing, and that's great. The materials and the things matter. Like, we don't use these cameras by accident. I think that's the other thing. Is like talking to you as a fellow fan of Leica and of German made things, and you know, like that's one of the things that's so appealing. We could use all sorts of cameras of all sorts of manufacturers and get very similar results, and that's not the point. Like, a big part of this is the way this thing feels and the way you use it. Hugh Brownstone of Three Blind Men on YouTube said something once in one of his videos about the M and the way that you raise it to your eye, and it asks you to kind of be better. And I thought, well, you know, and then I got my first M and I held it up and I was like, oh no.
Whoa.
Like, because I pressed that shutter on that, and it was a used M10 as well. And I pressed that shutter button for the first time on my M10 and was just like, oh no, this is like, I'm a goner. This is it now. I understand. Something made sense, but you don't get that through a video. Like, you have to hold it and you have to use it and you have to try it, and as you say, leaning into limitations of like manual focus and things, to the point where when I held my my stepdad's A7C, which is an incredible camera in all sorts of ways,
absolutely,
it is covered in buttons in a way that made me, I kid you not, like physically recoil a little bit. I didn't like it, and it was like, I held it and I got made some images and looked at them, and I was in a massive hurry to give it back. Like, I couldn't let go of it soon enough. It didn't feel right anymore. And I can't. And I had an A7 for years, but just like bought it when it first came out, but I just couldn't go there anymore.
I can
funny.
relate. Exactly. Yeah. I used for a few months. It didn't last long. I used an A7R
Mm.
Mark IV, I think. There's so many of those. I've
Mm.
even, but I think that's what I used. And there's so many buttons. I always felt like I was one button press away from accidentally changing this dramatic setting that I couldn't get myself back out of. And I
Yes.
found myself just kind of stressed out on work shoots with it, going like, well, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen if I accidentally push this sequence of
Mm.
buttons. So like I was more distracted by that, where my
Right.
SL2S almost has no buttons. My
Yeah.
M10 doesn't have any buttons.
Yeah.
It's yeah, it's really, the first time you put an M to your eye, it's really this process of going, oh my gosh, like this camera is not going to do any of this for me.
Yes.
This is entirely my doing, where I focus this and taking the time to, that's the first thing I let people know is, as you're looking at Leica, and certainly as you're looking at a digital Leica M, we've adjusted to, these cameras that will do it all for you. And
Yeah.
the M will turn on, and then it's on you. And
Yes. Yeah. And
that's what
now,
I love about it.
yes.
That's, you know,
Yeah. I
yeah,
remember you were
that's,
very kind when I was buying mine. You
oh, I
messaged
love
me.
it.
You were just like, are you were like, have you used one? Are you
I
sure?
love,
Like you knew about my Ricoh GR, like, I
yep,
still think the GR3 is an incredible camera, but it's a very different beast.
very
And
different.
you were great. You were just, oh no, I need to. It was like checking in on someone like before they're about to do
Oh,
this big thing,
absolutely. Well, yeah,
Um,
you gotta know what you're getting into with that
yeah,
system,
yeah, yeah,
because yeah, especially, but you've, like I said, we were saying, you have the bug, you're in it. I mean, I can tell you're in it for life.
mm,
You're a lifer like the rest of us.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Now you start the journey, the rabbit hole of lenses, and different sensors, and
yeah,
the limitations that, of the minimum focus distance and things like
yep,
that. And
yep.
no, it's been really fun to see kind of your passion and enjoyment for the system. It's kind of, it's fun to see, because like you said, we did talk kind of through your beginnings of entering the Leica M system, and I was like, I
Mm,
just want you to know, like, how different this is than
yeah.
anything else you could use. And it's been fun to see you kind of out in the world with it, and how you've taken to it. It's awesome.
Yeah,
It's really fun to see.
I can't imagine using another. It's why my one camera rule exists.
That's
I
great.
can't
I love that.
imagine going to something else now. That's the danger, is that, as you say, a Q would be a phenomenal complement to
Yep.
having, but then you've got two, and then
But
you've
then
got the
you have
stress of
to.
which one. I had this when I had more than one motorbike. It doesn't go
Oh
well,
man.
because then you're like, well, which am I using one enough? Like, does
Oh
that
my
mean I
gosh.
don't? And you just get into this whole thing. It's bad enough with lenses, let
It is.
alone, when
Yes, it
you're
is.
like, am I betraying my Summicron 50?
Oh
When
man.
Mm.
I'm using my beloved Zeiss 35. The answer, of course, is no. Stop overthinking it. But
No, trust me, man. I could drive myself insane.
yeah,
Say if I have a trip booked, and
mm,
I'm going, okay, I'm going to be at this place. Oh, what if I want the Q for the close focus? But I'm going to be doing this candid stuff. What if I want my 50?
yeah,
I'm embarrassed to say how, what the agonizing process that honestly is for me. And my wife is like, why don't you just take both? And I say, I couldn't do that.
yeah,
It's not in me to do that.
yeah. I do admire
I'm
your
only
weekend
taking
shots.
one.
Yeah, when
Oh,
you
that's awesome.
pack your bag and you're like,
Yeah,
before the
this is
trip,
what's going. Yeah,
it said, yeah, like, this is what I'm taking. And then
this
you
is what's
can,
going.
it's sort of educational as well in some ways, because then I can look at them and assess and go, right,
Sure,
what's this? And it's because you do start to recognize like rendering differences in focal range. Obviously, that
absolutely.
you can see what kind of lens it is often, or you can notice compression and things like that. But it takes time. So it's quite nice that you kind of set that up with yours. And sometimes I'll go back
Absolutely.
and forward in stories when people,
Oh,
with
sure.
you and stuff, and so you can see it. But on that subject of like taking cameras
Sure.
about, what was it that kind of first put a camera in your hands in the first place?
Okay, that's a good question. And I know I can tell you exactly what it was. I had, when I was a teenager, just out of high school, I was working in communications, and the department I was working for purchased this Sony super cutting edge digital camera, and it wrote to these little tiny CDs. I don't
Oh
remember
wow.
what I remember. It was a Sony, and it was big. It was like 3 megapixels, and it wrote to these CD discs.
Huh.
And I remember being just blown away that I was going, there's no way image quality could be better than this ever.
Right.
Like this 3 megapixel digital file,
Mm.
you know, because and this was kind of when I was looking at the literal 1 megapixel cameras and things, and this 3 megapixel Sony came along that, you know, and kind of the department that I was working in got it, and I just snapped over
right.
over these digital images. And even the process of like, you would take this CD out of the computer or out of the camera and like put it in your computer, and it was so weird. You know, I've never really seen anything like it since, but yeah, it was a Sony 3.3 megapixel digital camera. It was just like, okay, there's something to this, because, you know, I've always kind of been in the creative world. You know, I've been playing guitar since I was a little kid, and I was always into art. So it never surprised me that I got into photography. It's surprised me a little bit kind of how long I've stayed in photography. You know, photography has kind of stayed a forefront for, I mean, 25 years in my life now. And, you know, I've had my time with film cameras and all that, but yeah, you know, kind of still my part of still, even after all this time, kind of my major motivation for traveling and things is to take a camera with me. That never went away. Yeah, it was a Sony 3.3 megapixel weird weird digital camera that I was just like, wow, these files, I can't believe these are producible. It blew my mind.
And that was it, hooked ever since.
That was it, man. That was it. Yeah. And then it was
amazing.
the Fuji 1.2, and that was where that was when I was like, okay, I'm gonna have a camera with me everywhere I go. Is with that Fuji 1.2. And I was in bands then, and, you know, we would travel around a little bit, and it was just so fun. You know, there was no Instagram or Facebook or anything, so I wasn't doing anything. No one was even seeing the images except for me. But man, I just loved it. I just loved that little 1 megapixel. It was, that's when I started like, okay, everything I do, I'm just gonna have this thing with me. Yeah, and that was like 25 years ago, probably.
Well, and fast forward to now, and your second lens on your list of your prime 3 was is that the 90 Summicron M?
Oh, that would probably be one of them.
Right.
It would be, yeah, because, you know, and I mentioned that lens, the 90 Summicron. And again, it's a pre-aspherical, because, especially when I travel, most of my photography, I was touching on this a little bit, is kind of subject based. You know, some people refer to it as still life. I don't really think of my photography as still life, but I do think of it as kind of subject based. Like, here is an object in a small scene. You know, it's never a grand, huge, you know, look at this epic thing. Right. It's always kind of a small, you know, I like to shoot in a way to kind of leave some mystery kind of on the edges. I like the viewer to kind of be able to fill in the blanks of, wow, I wonder what that place was, or, you know, that's a good looking scene on that table. What did the rest of that restaurant look like? You know, that's kind of how I shoot. And so 90 millimeter for me, especially when I'm traveling, is really invaluable for that, because I can sit at dinner and shoot across the restaurant at a scene without moving. And, you know, I'm trying not to think part of it's laziness, but maybe part of it's laziness.
Look, we're not getting any younger, Danny. Like, none of us.
That's true. That I can just sit in one spot and kind of let the action happen around me. But yeah, the 90 millimeter f2 pre-aspherical is one that it would be really hard for me to travel without. You know, and there's been times I've considered it being the only lens that I use. You know, like you were mentioning, I'll do these like weekend excursions where, like, okay, this is what I'm taking, only this lens. You know, and let's just see what this does. And I've been close to, I'll tell you, I think the day's coming where you're going to see my M and that 90 millimeter and nothing else. And I'm going to do the entire trip like that. and see what it can do. I'm fortunate, a lot of people, because not 90 millimeter frame lines through a Leica M are tiny.
Yeah,
it's a challenge to shoot 90 millimeter through a viewfinder like that. But I've had good luck with it. I don't know what it is, because my eyes are pretty bad, especially the eye that I put up to the camera's really bad. Like, that's my bad eye, but I've really had extreme luck with 75 millimeters and 90 millimeters. The little rangefinder patch. I don't know. It's just not a challenge for me. I'm really, really fortunate. 90 millimeter, I would tell you, similar to how we did when you were entering your like M world, is like, I just want you to know what you're kind of it's not easy to manually focus a 90 millimeter lens through this viewfinder, but it's doable.
Yeah,
it's
I've
totally
cheated.
Doable.
I've done it, but I have a 90 Voigtlander 2.8, which I really like.
Nice.
It's a lovely lens. I've got a great photo of Alice a couple of years ago now, which I really liked. Awesome. But I've used it at the MotoGP. So obviously an M is not first choice when you're thinking of photographing motorcycles at 200 miles an hour.
That's awesome.
But I will say to you that the 90 mil that I took, and it was beautiful sunny weather. These photos are on Flickr of the I went to Holland. It's the second time I've been with my brother, and I had my M. Because there's a danger, I think, with it's one of the things I like about your photos and the things you post, is that you're not making it seem like photography should be your job, like to the person who's looking at it, right? Because I think I love a lot of photographers, but because they make primarily photography content, you can come away from it thinking, if I'm not actually working this scene and thinking about it like a pro, I'm doing it wrong, and I'm enjoying. And this, so the whole point of this series of interviews is to get away from the idea that you walk away from the conversation and feel like you should be a pro photographer, and that if you didn't do it this way. And so taking an M to the MotoGP when there's everyone around you has got their big Sonys and Canons and Nikons with the huge. There was a guy we met who, it must have been in his sort of late 60s, and it was about 30 degrees Celsius. Like, it was super hot. It's like getting up to like 90, 100 degrees, and no shade. And there's no shade because it's a racetrack, right? There's nowhere to hide unless you're in the thing. And this guy was pulling around a massive Pelly case and had his Nikon full frame. And he will have got some incredible photos, no doubt.
Sure.
But he was sweating his guts out carrying this massive thing, and he was looking at my camera, and he was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Well, I'm just enjoying myself."
That's fantastic.
and so you end up with these shots where you get the crowd in, you get some of the stands, because at 90 mil you're not getting just the bike. And know that I'll leave. One of the people I'm interviewing for this series actually is a MotoGP photographer. And so I will talk to him about, like, no doubt the A9 and the prime 200 and 400 mil lenses he uses, surely. But that's a different kind of thing. Like, he makes it look like every photo was shot in this beautiful clinical, like, perfect, and they're so sharp and they're so detailed, but it's a completely different thing. Whereas I will go and capture the style of photography I always capture, and it just so happens I'm pointed at a Ducati or whatever. And so at the 90 mil, you're right. But if you stick that thing at like F8, F11 and point it in the right direction, then you're going to be fine. You're going to get something that is acceptable. And then you lean in, as you were saying earlier, you lean into that limitation.
100%. Man, that's so true. And you made a really good point about not having to walk away from every photographer feeling like, well, I'm not doing that, so I'm not doing this right. I have kind of taken the stance, and I wasn't even aware of this until recently. I was having a conversation with a friend about photography, and I was communicating that I found myself just incredibly frustrated with this grand and epic, and everything is unobtainable, and look at this shot I got. And I never realized until recently, but as I look back at my own photography and what I just shoot for myself, I think somewhere in there's a little bit of a rebellion against that, just to go, well, I don't have a grand epic. I'm not photographing movie stars. I'm not on tour with a worldwide band to get these epic shots. So this is what's right in front of me. And I'm just going to photograph it in a way that speaks to me. And that was never deliberate. but it has coincided with kind of my frustration with my general frustration with I get so tired of seeing these unobtainable images. Like, yeah, because it's kind of what you were speaking to. Is I just walk away from it going, well, I couldn't ever capture that. I mean, I'm not behind the scenes at the Oscars to get those shots. So it just started turning me off after a while. And I think that has spoken some to kind of, a little bit of what you and I were saying about the limitations of enjoying the limitations of these systems, but more so so what is right in front of me? Well, I have these old records. I'm gonna, and there are ways that I can show what's right in front of me without without chasing this epic scene that's just unobtainable. I just found that to be exhausting almost.
Yes. Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's one of the things that we should get back to this being fun,
Absolutely.
In my dream that inspired this podcast, Jason Momoa and I were just having fun. We were just looking at lenses. That's all it was.
And it was just fun. Is that
exactly simple. What if it was just fun, Danny? And on that sort of, speaking of fun, like you made a book. Was it 2 years ago now?
Yes, it was.
Because I feel like that also ties in nicely to what we're talking about here. Like, these were other people's photos, people just capturing the world around them. How did you come across all those negatives or slides?
That's a great question. And you got one of, I only made 50 copies. I
made sure I had one of those.
You got one. And you were one of, I think yours might have been the only one. I think I shipped to you. I shipped one to China. Other than that, they were all within the US. But so my wife and I, we were at a thrift store. As you can tell in my photography, my house, we just enjoy vintage things. And so we were at an antique store, and I found a case of slides. And they were all Kodachrome slide. And I'm like, well, I've obviously I'm into film. I'm just going to see what this is. And I bought the whole lot, and there was a ton of them. There's probably 2,000 of them. It was all from the same photographer. And that started me down this horrible rabbit hole of, I need the right scanner. I need the right equipment. I need the right, I need the right software. So my process for those, and that started this crazy year or so of just scouring eBay and Facebook and Etsy for as many slides as I could possibly come across. And part of the kind of excitement in that was I would get a batch of 300 slides, and they would all be total throwaway. A picture of a piano someone was selling, so they took a picture of it in this dimly lit hall, not art, not even nothing resembling artistic use of a camera, but there would be this one shot in there of a guy after work laying on the cement, and that's in my book. That's one of them that's in the book. So it was this huge journey of, I connected with these old images, and I really connected with the process of just literally bringing them back to life, getting the right scanner and the right software. And my hands on those images, I scanned them, but other than that, it was pretty minimal. As old as some of them were, I always had to go in and, the process of cleaning them up was pretty dramatic. Some of these were from the 40s, and so they were filthy and scratched up and beat up, but that process was kind of enjoyable because I did all that on my iPad Pro, so I'd sit down and put a movie on and and just go to work with the Apple Pencil and cleaning those up. But and I compiled them into a book. I called it Found Film. Now, I called the book Volume 1.
I wasn't going to bring that up because you sounded, the last time we spoke about the book, it sounded like it was such a harrowing experience. You weren't keen to go back.
I don't think I would do it again. So maybe that makes the release even more special, that it's called Volume 1, and there's never going to be a Volume 2 ever. I don't think I'll ever do it again. But I only released 50 of them. They're all gone. I have one copy for myself, and they're gone. That's it. So there will be some listeners here that have some copies of them. I hand numbered every one of them. That was really a labor of love for sure. That process, I was so proud, of bringing these images back to life, and they'd been lost. These were literally, I called it found, because these were lost images. You know, they sat in boxes in people's basements, and you know, to bring them back to community where, you know, guys like you and me can see them and enjoy them was, man, that was such a fulfilling process. But the technicalities of bringing really beat up old slides, and quite honestly, the process of going through thousands and thousands of these slides. I mean, I just grew tired of, okay, I'm going to shut myself away in my office for a day and just, you know, go through thousands of these. And so there's not that many images in the book. I scanned thousands of them, you know, and then from there curated down to what's in the book. So I mean, that was like, I'm very happy with that book, and I really enjoyed that process. But I don't think that we will see a volume 2 from the book.
No. Well, I think it's a great thing. I'm really glad I have one. Like, I think it's, you know, to support someone who's undertaking that kind of endeavor.
It's great.
Yeah. No, it's very cool.
And it made it to the right hand. You know, you were one of the, you know, you get to enjoy them. It was worth it. You know, the right people got them. You know, I kept it really small, and no, I'm glad you got one. You were the first overseas order, and I think you were only one of 2 overseas orders. So
there you go.
We're all in the U.S.
No, that's cool. Well, we'll from one labor of love to another love. We can probably talk about your last lens, which I think you had. I think there's a bit of conflict here,
there is
whether
some
it's
conflict.
the Minolta or whether it's the Summicron 35, the V4. I think.
Now, up until about a week ago, it would have hands down been the 35 V4.
Yeah.
Everything paired with my M10, everything that lens gave me was, but I parted with that lens about a week ago. This is breaking news on for your podcast. I parted with that lens for a very specific reason. Okay. The Leica Q is my first love. It was my first, this is more than just a fun, you know, like the Leica Q changed photography for me. And I found myself with that 35 Summicron V4, the king of bokeh. They were, you know, however pronunciation. There's a lot of them. I found myself having that lens was very conflicted to why I would ever use my Leica Q, because I shoot my Leica Q basically as a 35 millimeter camera, you know, all the time. The crop modes on 35 millimeters all the time. And I was really conflicted about, you know, I'm just missing my Q. I want my Q to always have a very strong place in my life. And it always has a reason to be in my bag. And I found the 35 Summicron version 4 was honestly kind of replacing that reason. It was kind of, I was using it as my general snapshot thing. And part of that was wanting to challenge myself and pare down my Leica M lenses. I'll tell you honestly, a bigger part of that was wanting to be forced to use my Q even more. So I just eliminated the distraction. I just went, okay, I have my M and this 50 millimeter Summilux. So now I would probably tell you, as I just purchased my probably 6th copy, that the cheap, tiny, simple Minolta 40 millimeter f2, I would now say is one of 3 lenses that I've tried many times, and I just cannot live without that lens, because it's so low maintenance. You know, it's truly a lens that you're not even aware that you have it until you go to take a picture. There's just nothing to it. And the other thing I enjoy, you know, Leicas are not known for their obtainability and price point, you know, but this Minolta is so obtainable. You can, you know, everybody's got them. You can find them anywhere. They used to pair them. Minolta paired it with a, you know, with a CL, you know, it's just like, it was so easy to find. And it just has a rendering and a character that I've always loved. I still love it. It's similar in rendering to my 35, to what the version 4 was. It's just different enough. So it's really so if the Q is my everyday autofocus camera, then the M10 with that 40 millimeter Minolta is my everyday M camera. Like it just gets out. It exists in my bag, but it's out of the way. And you've done a lot of 35 millimeter. You are using the Zeiss F2,
the 2.8, the Biogon 2.8.
So you have the small one. Okay.
So I have the F2, and I don't like it very much. And there's nothing wrong with it.
I've had
it's
it.
amazing.
No, I've had it.
But there's something about it's funny. So I have a 2-monitor setup, and on my left-hand screen here, there's nothing on it at the moment. Is the photo I took of my youngest son with the leaf in front of his face?
Great,
that one that I took a year ago, and that was with that Zeiss. And it was the first time I was really acutely aware of character, as you're talking about it, like the rendering character.
Absolutely.
Because of the edges, because it has that kind of slightly antique, more characterful quality around the edge. And there was a guy used to run a website called Leica Lenses for Normal People. And what he would do is he would go and review all the lenses, because there's the pocket of the community who are kind of looked down their noses a little bit at like the Elmerits and the Sumerits a little bit,
of course.
And like the Elmerit 28, I adore. I think that's an incredible overlooked lens, for example.
Great.
And he loved it too. But his review of the Zeiss 35-28 was that this lens, he said, was the sort of smart, intelligent business person who after the meeting then pops an edible instead of a glass of rosé. And he's like it does everything that you want it to do, but in a way that's just slightly different enough that it's worth looking at. And as you say, also it's very, very small.
It's
so
tiny.
It just fits in a bag, so you can get your camera in and out your bag very fast. And the thing that was pushing me away from it was the guy in the Leica store in San Fran, who got into my head about the qualities of the Leica lenses versus the Zeiss lenses and things, and got into my brain a bit. And so that was when I bought my Summicron, and I sold it. And then it was only really at the end of last year I was like, no, I'm missing something here. And when I read the Leica lenses, and you should go and read the Leica lenses, I'll put it in show notes because it's hilarious. Awesome. It's a crime this guy doesn't write and do the site anymore. He's kind of moved on. I think he got some grief from people in the camera community in general, and just decided it wasn't worth it. And it's a shame, because I approached him actually about being in this and stuff, and he's like, it's not really what I do anymore. I don't really want to put myself out there. But the way he writes is incredible. And the way he writes about like the 35 Summicron that you were talking about, the V4 specifically, and then also like the Zeiss and things, I really appreciate those differences. But I have the 35 f2. If anyone listening wants to buy it of me, but I don't love it. There's something about it that I don't love. It wasn't right. It's like same as you.
I've owned it. I think I've owned that one twice, and I haven't owned it in probably 6 or 7 years. Yeah, I've owned the 35 2.8, the tiny one, and I'm proud, and this was never deliberate. But I will say, I'm not against at all kind of standing with the underdogs in our $400 Minolta lenses, that we can get them on eBay, and we can, we can find them anywhere. And man, it can just be fun. It's like what you were saying. It can just be fun.
Do you know, I don't know if I've told you the story. When I was in New York last year, I went to the Leica store in New York.
Okay.
And I tried a 35 Summilux, and the size of it put me off a little bit because they're longer.
Yeah, it's a commitment.
Yeah, but it was lovely, but also wide open. It was just that little bit softer. And what I've stopped really shooting wide open a lot of the time anyway. Because I'm kind of taking more photos that are a little bit more, this is the scene, maybe, right in front of me.
I've seen that. Yeah, I agree. I've seen
that. So I've been shooting much more at like 5.6 or even 8 sometimes. And because I'm it's a little more documentary style, maybe it's a little more zone focusy kind of style.
Absolutely.
And they practically walked me out of the shop when I started talking. When I started talking about, I was like, because there comes a point where something's got to be in focus, right? And this came from when I was in Wetzlar last year, and they let me try a monochrome Q2 and run around with that for the afternoon. And it was great fun, but it all felt a bit too easy after using the M. Like everything was autofocus. And by the end of the afternoon, and obviously I'd had a hellish journey to get there, and so I was just loving it. I was like, it was Disneyland for Leica fans. And I was running around, and over dinner I was just looking at pictures, and I was like, all I've done is isolate a blade of grass at f1.7.
Oh, that's valid. That's a valid
and that's
point.
fine, but it's because I look at those images fondly because I was having a lovely time, and I was playing with a camera I didn't own, and all the rest of it. But taking a step back from it, I was like, this is just some sort of I'm not really learning anything from doing this. I'm just having fun, and that's fine. But the M, I feel, has made me better because I've changed and I've adapted, and I'm seeing things different. I'm viewing things differently.
And I see that, honestly. I see that in your journey. I see that in your photography, without question. I can tell when you've got the M out. I can tell that you're just viewing things differently. And it's like what you were saying. A 1.4 lens for at least for what you're doing currently, and kind of the documentary style that you're doing currently, you wouldn't obtain a ton of benefit from that.
No, I'd never be down there. I'd always be at like 2.8.
exactly at minimum. So I'm happy to stand with you and the underdogs with our Minoltas and our Zeisses and our Voigtlanders. I love Voigtlander. I can't get enough. So I love them all. And it maybe speaks a little bit to the fact that for M and mostly digital, I don't use brand new lenses. I don't use spherical lenses. Now for work, this would be a completely different conversation. I use an SL2S and the APO SL lenses and the craziest things I can get for clients that, but for me, I don't have anything newer than I mean, I don't own any aspherical lenses at all. They're all pre-aspherical, and that's the path. I've really I've had the kind of benefit of having to try everything. So it's trial by, I know that I just don't like those as much. So I just don't try them anymore.
No, well,
kind of crazy, but
I know what you mean, but I think it's also one of the great versatile things about most camera systems. Like if you start to demonize certain lens types or lens manufacturers, the whole point, all of these systems have tons of lenses available for them from tons of different makers, and that one thing you're looking for might just be in that lineup. And if someone gets in your head and goes, unless it's a modern 6-bit coated lens,
right,
then it doesn't count. And will you ever find it again in Lightroom? You're like, oh no, you're right. I have to now spend $6,000 on a Similux, because the man in the shop got in my head. It's like, or what you could do is just enjoy what you're using,
and go out with the family and throw it in your bag. And
there's so much power to having that with you, isn't it? It's always there. On that topic, then you've been very generous with your time. I will let you return to your life. The SO4, you were having a ton of fun before Christmas with that. How have you got on with that?
So, man, I got so many questions about the SO4 2. People asking me, I want to know about the pictures it takes. Does it take good pictures? Does it take good pictures? And I always answered the same way. My response was always, you cannot look at the SO4 2 as how good of pictures it takes. You have to look at it as how fun of pictures it takes. It is not, you could get better image quality from a 10-year-old iPhone. If you were, the SO4 2 is about fun, and when I that extends to my 7-year-old daughter grabs the SO4 and takes a picture of her stuffed animal and prints it off, and it's on a pin on her corkboard in her bedroom, it's kind of I'll hand it to my daughter and say, go fill these 10 shots with things you love in our home, and it's 7 shots of our cat and one of one of my record collection. And so the SO4 is a connection of fun, nothing else. It's really, that's kind of the perfect full circle to the SO4 is not, it's not about the images that it makes. It's that it's kind of funny to define a camera that way, but I would say the images from a SO4 are one of the last things you should pay attention to with a SO4. It is about using it, printing it, being in that moment, sharing that moment, being in a moment with someone and taking an image in that and handing them that print. That's the SO4, being at the grandparents' house and, I'm on a walk with my daughter and them and their dog and getting a picture of that and handing it to them. That is the SO4. And as all things Leica, they have done that better than anyone else will come close to, but it's still, at the end of the day, the Sofort is a camera that is not about the images. it's about the experience based around the images.
Yes.
So it's a lot of fun, and they nailed it with it. It's a lot of fun.
It's really good. I really love ours, and it's I have the original Sofort, and honestly, if you want image quality from your instant camera, that's better images.
It's true.
The lens they put on that original instant camera. I mean, Alice bought me that for my birthday when it first came out as a bit of a joke, as like, this is the only Leica you'll ever own, and so she bought it for me. And when we got the first photos, I had a bunch of instant cameras over the years, and she looked at me, she was like, "Oh wow, are they doing different things with the film?" I was like, "No, the film has always been capable of this. It's just when you stick it in a camera that's got a retail price of $50, then you're limited on how good the components can be." So when they did it, they were like, "Well, no, this is going to have a better lens. We're going to pretend call it whatever, like a Sumar or something." But fundamentally, it's at least better than the Instax Mini that gave it the rest of the guts. And actually, it's funny, your notebooks and things have been a bit of an inspiration. It's like the Sofort is the reason that my current notebook that I'm working through is that thick, because we keep sticking kind of instant pictures in and things like that. It's great.
You are using the Sofort exactly as it should be used, as it should be used. That's fantastic. Capturing little slices of life, when you got that Sofort too, I didn't have one yet, and I specifically remember kind of seeing your stuff, going like, "Tell me more about this. Tell me more about this aspect with the Sofort too." So you were quite honestly, we kind of got to. You were kind of instrumental in me obtaining that Sofort too. So I got to help you with the M. You got to help me on my gateway to the Sofort too. You were posting stuff, and I was like, okay, I do enjoy this. Like, it is good. Is that with the Sofort? Yeah, it's great. It is a ton of fun.
I was very lucky. They kept it for me as well at LA. They kept it at the store. I emailed them. I was like, "I'm going to be in the country on the day this comes out." And for them to take just purely the email of a random stranger, it's like, "I'm going to be in the country. I'm going to take an Uber."
He might be in the country. That's great.
Yeah, if my boss lets me, I'll take an Uber. But it was brilliant. It was really good.
You were one of the first people I saw in the U.S. And it's funny that you were just visiting. You were actually one of the first people in the U.S. who I knew that had one. You got it really early.
I was very lucky.
You got it really early, at least in the circles that I'm in. And like, you were the first guy I knew that had one.
Yeah.
So,
cool. There we go. Claim to fame.
That's claim to fame. It's the Sofort 2 guy.
Forever known as. Well, I've loved this. This has been a brilliant conversation. It's nice to finally speak to you and sort of get to sit down and kind of talk through this stuff.
I love it.
But well, thank you for coming on, Danny. It's a real pleasure. Is there anything you want to point people towards before we close things out?
No, I don't think so. I mean, you've kind of been a fun example to, because as you said, I've kind of seen your whole journey with Leica and, wanting to get into it and getting one and what you're doing with it and kind of the journey with the lenses. It's so much fun to get to watch that process. Because I've been shooting Leica for 8 years, where I haven't been shooting. It's all I've shot. Where when I went to Leica, I pretty much didn't use anything else from then on. So it's kind of fun to get to go, I remember that getting that 50 Summicron, and no, it's been, I enjoy your documentation of that. It's, and that's kind of my encouragement is, I hope you keep exploring that and, keep kind of posting, your life with that. And it's awesome. It's awesome to kind of see the journey from that starting point. It's been great.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, man. I really appreciate that. That's really lovely.
Man, no, absolutely. I love it. I always enjoy it. So
cool. Well, you have an amazing afternoon. It's 9:30 here. So
all right,
I'll be signing off for the evening. So from the Highlands of Scotland, thank you very much, Danny.
Man, thank you very much. We'll talk soon.
Man. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Well, there it is. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as we did. My thanks again to Danny for giving up his time and for putting up with some technical difficulties which you didn't hear, thankfully, at the beginning of that thing. Always test your setup before you record your first episode of something that you want to put out into the world. It's a good idea, even if you're just doing it for fun. It was quite stressful on a Saturday night trying to get that lined up while someone was online, but we got there. So thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this, let me know and tell a friend. And if you've got feedback, thoughts, ideas for people that I might want to talk to, I'd love to hear from you. You can drop me a mail on me@ianfarrell.com. Ian is spelled the Scottish way, that's IAINFARRELL.com. Thanks so much. See you next time.